Have you ever walked into your own daughter's wedding and realized you were just a prop in someone else's production? My name is Franklin Delaney. I'm 76 years old, retired from the United States Navy after nearly 3 decades of service, followed by another 15 years managing human resources at a shipbuilding firm in Norfolk. And yet nothing in my military or civilian life quite prepared me for the moment my soon-to-be son-in-law looked me in the eyes and said, "Sir, I think it's best if you head home. We've got everything under control here, but I'm getting ahead of myself. I live alone now in a weathered cedar house on the edge of Chesapeake Bay, a home I restored with my own hands after Eleanor passed. Every beam, every window frame, every coat of white paint on the porch railing carries a memory. I still rise before the sun, not because I have to, but because the habit of early watch never quite leaves you. Most mornings I start my day with black coffee and a slow walk down to the dock behind my house. I check the knots on the ropes, tighten the covers on the skiff, listen to the gulls. It's quiet here. The kind of quiet you have to earn after a lifetime of noise. Madison, my daughter, is the only family I have left. She lives in Richmond now, works as a communications consultant for one of those big-shot Senate campaigns. You've probably seen her on TV standing just off stage behind a polished candidate, feeding them lines through an earpiece. She's good at her job, no question. Polished, sharp, strategic, but also distant. In the past few years, our conversations had thinned to polite check-ins. A Christmas card, a voicemail on Father's Day. I'd stopped expecting more. So when I received an embossed envelope in the mail last month, I thought it was another fundraiser or gala invite. But when I opened it and saw her name, Madison Elise Delaney, and Ethan Russell Walsh, cordially invite you. I'll admit my hands trembled just a bit. A wedding. She hadn't told me anything about a man in her life. Not in any of our few and far between calls. But there he was, Ethan Walsh, co-founder of one of the East Coast's most dynamic digital media ventures. That's what the website said when I looked him up. Suits tailored within an inch of their life. Phrases like brand disruption and strategic narrative ecosystems, whatever that means. Still, I RSVP'd. Yes. Of course I did. I'm her father. When she called the next week, it was brief. "I'm so glad you can come, Dad. It means a lot." Her voice had that performance polish she uses on TV. "I'd love to meet Ethan," I said. There was a pause. "Yeah, about that. We're having a small pre-wedding dinner this Saturday. Just close family and some of Ethan's business associates. Think of it as more professional than personal. But you should still come." I chuckled. I can handle a fancy dinner, Mads. I've worn a dress uniform to events with admirals and ambassadors. "Right," she said quickly. "Oh, and Dad. Maybe wear that blazer I got you last Christmas and trim your beard just a little." I didn't ask why. I just said sure, because sometimes you agree to small things to stay connected to big ones. But I'd be lying if I said that request didn't stick with me. Not because I mind shaving or dressing up, but because I've learned to recognize when someone is trying to sand off the rough edges of who you are, to make you more palatable to their world. And I suspected that's exactly what Ethan Walsh was doing to my daughter, and now to me. Dominion Country Estate was the kind of place that made you feel underdressed, no matter what you wore. A former plantation home turned luxury resort nestled in the hills outside Charlottesville. The kind of venue politicians booked for fundraisers and CEOs used for team bonding weekends that cost more than my yearly Navy pension. I pulled up in my old Ford, washed, polished, but still unmistakably a working man's truck. A valet approached, all crisp uniform and toothy grin. "Event name, sir. Walsh Delaney Rehearsal Dinner," I said. He gave a short nod, took my keys, and as I stepped inside, I felt the air change. It wasn't just the temperature. It was the kind of chill that comes from a room full of people who make decisions with other people's money. Everything gleamed. Marble floors, champagne flutes in every hand, subtle jazz drifting from an actual string quartet in the corner. And then I saw her. Madison. She was radiant, no denying that. Hair swept up in a graceful twist, emerald dress hugging her figure heels that clicked across the marble as she walked toward me. "Dad." She kissed my cheek, her smile bright but not quite reaching her eyes. "You made it, I said I would," I replied, handing her a small box. "It's not much. Just your mother's necklace. Thought maybe you'd want something old to wear tomorrow." Something flickered across her face, surprise maybe, or guilt. She opened it, stared at the delicate silver pendant Eleanor used to wear every Sunday to church. "Thanks," she said softly. "I'll think about it." Before I could say more, a man approached from behind her, trim 30-something, with slicked back hair, polished shoes, and a smirk that came before his words. "Mr. Delaney, what an honor." He extended a hand. "Ethan Walsh." His grip was firm, too firm, practiced, not personal. His eyes scanned me like a resume. "I've heard so much about you," he said. "Wish I could say the same," I replied with a cordial nod. He laughed. "She told me you were old school. I like that." "The world needs more grit these days." I didn't respond. Just followed them into the dining room, where round tables sparkled under chandeliers and name cards waited at every seat. Mine said Franklin Delaney in gold script, tucked at the end of the table, far from the center, far from the conversations that mattered. Dinner was 5 courses, most of which I couldn't pronounce. I cut into my duck confit while Ethan regaled the table with stories of landing the DeVries campaign and revamping the governor's image. No one asked me about shipyards or sea duty. Not one question about Madison's childhood or Eleanor, just metrics markets and Madison's media reach. So Ethan said between courses, sipping from a goblet of red wine that probably cost more than my boots. "Madison tells me you've done well for yourself. Some real estate, a tidy retirement. Smart moves for your generation." I set my fork down slowly. I've worked hard. Saved. Took care of my family. That was the smart move. He smiled, but it didn't touch his eyes. "We were wondering," he continued now, leaning in, lowering his voice just enough to feign intimacy, "if you'd considered helping us out with the honeymoon. We're eyeing this eco-luxe villa in Bora Bora, completely solar-powered. Private chef. Madison said you've always believed in investing in memories." I looked at my daughter, whose eyes were now fixed on her plate. "We've already booked the villa," Ethan added. "But of course the gift could cover the cost retroactively. Think of it as a legacy thing." Legacy. He used that word like it was a discount code. I took a slow breath. "You're asking me to pay for your vacation. I'm offering you a chance to give your daughter the send-off she deserves." His voice was smooth, practiced. "She's entering a new world now, Mr. Delaney. My world." I noticed, I said quietly, pushing back my chair. His eyes narrowed just a fraction. "I hope you're not taking this the wrong way. It's normal. expected. Besides, Madison says you're very financially conservative, but sometimes legacy requires stepping outside your comfort zone. I stood adjusting my blazer. You're right about one thing, Mr. Walsh. Legacy does matter, and mine won't be measured by zip codes or bottle service or beachfront optics. It'll be measured by who I am when no one's watching. I left the dining room, then not storming out, but walking out with dignity. But in that moment, beneath the glow of crystal chandeliers and curated smiles, I felt it deep in my chest. This man didn't love my daughter. He loved what she represented. And worse, she was letting him. And I knew sooner or later there would be a reckoning. The morning after that dinner, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of black coffee and a knot in my stomach that wouldn't loosen. I'd faced a lot of men like Ethan Walsh in my lifetime. Men who wore charm like a mask and talked about vision instead of values. I'd seen them on the docks, in boardrooms, and even, unfortunately, in uniform. And I'd learned one thing from all those encounters: charm fades fast when accountability walks into the room. But this time, the stakes were different. This time, it wasn't just about contracts or workplace politics. It was about my daughter. The problem with being old-fashioned, as Ethan called it, is that people assume it means slow, sentimental, harmless. But the thing about men like me, men who've made it to this age with our principles intact, is that we don't rush into storms unless we already know where the lifeboats are. And I knew where mine were. After I retired, I never really let go of the network I'd built. 3 decades in the Navy, then nearly 15 more managing workforce operations in one of the most complex naval shipyards on the East Coast. Those aren't jobs you just walk away from. I still got monthly check-ins from former colleagues, invitations to roundtables, the occasional request to mentor some hotshot junior officer or HR exec. People like to talk about retirement like it's the end of their life stories. But for folks like us, vets, tradesmen, engineers, it's not the end. It's just the part where we finally get to speak freely. And when we speak, people still listen. So that morning, I pulled out my old black moleskin notebook, the one I used to call my legacy log. Inside were pages of contacts, handwritten and dog-eared over time. People I trusted. People who knew how to dig, who'd seen through the glitz more than once. I started with Jack Whitmore, used to head security contracting for Federal Communications. Now semi-retired in Virginia Beach. We'd served together in the Gulf back in '91, and he owed me a favor from an old base incident I'd handled quietly for him. When I mentioned the name Ethan Walsh, Jack let out a low whistle over the line. He's the brand boy, right, smooth talker, slim suits, real LinkedIn energy. That's him, I said. You ever crossed paths? Not directly. But I've heard his name pop up in a few procurement committee circles. Something about media strategy for the Atlantic Naval Initiative, AIN. That raised my eyebrow. That project had real money and real oversight. If Ethan had weaseled his way near, that there would be a paper trail. You want me to poke around? Jack asked. Only if it won't get you tangled up, I said. He laughed. Frank, I'm old. I'm retired. That means I've got time to untangle just about anything. 2 hours later, I got a call back. Check this out, Jack said, not even bothering with pleasantries. AIN didn't hire Ethan's firm directly. But they were considering him until a whistleblower came forward. Said Ethan had taken credit for a project pitch that was stolen from a junior associate. Did they act on it? They buried it. Too much hassle to go public. but the contract was quietly awarded elsewhere. I leaned back in my chair, the ache in my chest replaced by something colder. Do you know who the whistleblower was? Can't say for sure, but there's a name I keep hearing in connection. Lorna Hastings. Used to run crisis management for a few government subcontractors. She's no nonsense. If anyone knows the real-life stories behind Ethan's golden boy image, it's her. I wrote the name down. Lorna Hastings. Another path. Another door. And the first crack in Ethan Walsh's shiny veneer. I met Lorna Hastings at a small cafe tucked behind a courthouse in Alexandria, the kind of place where old government contractors sip bitter coffee and talk shop in hushed tones. She arrived exactly 2 minutes early, dressed in slate gray slacks and a linen blouse with a messenger bag slung over her shoulder. No makeup, no nonsense. Her handshake was firm, her eyes sharper than a scalpel. Frank Delaney, I introduced myself. I remember your name from a Navy HR workshop about a decade back, she said as we sat. You were the one who challenged the Admiral about toxic chain of command silence. I chuckled. I wasn't invited back after that. Good, she said flatly. Means you're worth talking to. We got our coffees and got down to business. So I began. You've heard of Ethan Walsh. She gave a tight nod. He's not in jail, if that's what you're asking. Which, frankly, is a miracle. That raised my eyebrows. That bad. Worse, she said, leaning in. The man is a walking liability in a tailored suit. He doesn't embezzle, he manipulates. Doesn't forge, he exploits. And he does it all with just enough polish to stay 2 steps ahead of accountability. I let that settle in before asking, what do you have on him? She opened her messenger bag and pulled out a slim leather folder. Nothing I'd take to court, but plenty I'd take to a boardroom. Inside were copies of email threads, internal memos, and a handful of redacted testimonies, most notably from a woman named Kendra Liu, a former creative lead at a public sector branding firm. The pattern was always the same. Ethan downplayed her concept, delayed implementation, then repackaged it as his own 6 weeks later in a presentation to a DC defense contractor. Kendra filed a complaint, Lorna said, flipping a page, but the firm settled quietly. Ethan got promoted. She left the industry. I stared at the documents for a long moment, my fingers tracing the edge of one of the printouts. I'd seen this kind of career sabotage before, quiet, clinical, devastating. It was the kind of violation you couldn't see on the outside, but it hollowed a person from within. I need to stop him, I said softly. Not just because he humiliated me, but because my daughter is walking into something dangerous and doesn't see it. Lorna studied me for a second. Then she nodded. I can connect you with Kendra. She's private, but if she knows this is about protecting someone else, she might talk. I scribbled the name and number into my notebook. Then I looked at her. Why are you helping me? She gave a tired smile. Because I'm sick of seeing these men win. There was a pause, then she added, and because I've heard life stories like yours before. Men who spent 40 years building integrity 1 brick at a time only to be mocked by boys who think legacy is just branding with better fonts. That hit me like a nail driven clean through oak. Legacy. They throw that word around now like it's marketing copy. But the kind of legacy I built, it was forged in silence, in service, in showing up when it mattered, without fanfare, without hashtags. I appreciate this, I said quietly. More than you know. As I stepped out of the cafe, the wind off the river was crisp and biting, but I welcomed it. For the first time since that cursed dinner, I felt something anchor inside me. A direction. A course to set. Ethan had built a house of cards on borrowed brilliance and borrowed money. It was time to shake the table. 3 days after I met with Lorna Hastings, I stood in front of the mirror, adjusting the collar on my navy blue blazer, the one Eleanor had insisted I buy, just in case someone ever invited me to the White House. We never made it to the White House. But that jacket had survived moths, heat, and memory. Now it was going into battle. It had been a long time since I felt this deliberate. Not angry, not emotional, just precise. The way I used to feel the night before a deployment, everything packed, locked down, and planned 3 steps ahead. I wasn't charging in with guns blazing. I was walking in with receipts. The meeting was set at the Baytech Strategic Forum, hosted at a downtown high-rise in Norfolk, the kind of place where decisions worth millions were made over seafood towers and bottled still water. And the very place where Ethan Walsh would be presenting a proposal to Mariner Systems, one of the largest defense-adjacent logistics contractors on the eastern seaboard. I'd called in a favor to an old friend, Charles Chuck Ridgway, former vice admiral, now head of board operations at Mariner. We hadn't spoken much since his second heart attack forced him to retire, but when I mentioned Ethan's name, his tone turned sharp. "You got concerns about this Walsh kid?" he asked. "I've got more than concerns," I told him. "I've got patterns." Chuck didn't even hesitate. "You show up with your evidence, I'll make sure the board listens. But you'd better be clean, Frank. We don't ruin a man over a bad haircut and arrogance." "Understood," I said. "I'm not coming with a grudge. I'm coming with the truth." And that's exactly what I brought with me. I had a folder, real paper, not a flash drive, filled with testimonial statements, printouts of emails and timelines, cross-referenced with publicly available company filings. Kendra Liu had come through just like Lorna said she might. So had a few others, a copywriter named Miguel, who'd seen Ethan gut an entire project team to save face, and a woman named Harper, who had audio recordings of her being berated in meetings just out of earshot from HR. And I didn't need all of it. I just needed enough to slow him down, to make the right people ask the right questions. I walked into the Mariner Systems conference room 15 minutes before the presentation. There were 10 people already seated, all men and women in their 50s and 60s, with silvered hair and leather portfolios. Chuck gave me a curt nod from the end of the table. I took the seat next to him and laid the folder in front of me like a quiet warning, and then Ethan walked in. He was in full peacock mode, tailored gray suit, burgundy tie, hair slicked, smile on command. He didn't notice me at first. He was too busy working the room with handshakes and great to finally meet US. But when his eyes landed on me just for a second, I saw it. That flicker, recognition, panic, and then calculation. "Mr. Delaney," he said coolly, adjusting his tie. "I wasn't expecting to see you here. Neither were the employees you took credit from," I replied, just as calmly. "Let's see how your presentation holds up under pressure." He blinked, then turned away with a rehearsed smile, but I saw his knuckles whiten just slightly around the handle of his laptop bag. For once, he was walking into a room where the story wasn't his to spin. And for the first time since this all began, I had the upper hand. Ethan launched into his presentation with the ease of someone who's done this 100 times. The screen behind him flickered to life with vibrant colors, minimalist fonts, and vague phrases like perception as leverage and narrative capitalization. He was charming, articulate, and utterly hollow. 10 minutes in, he unveiled his proposed strategy for Mariner Systems, a full-scale rebranding campaign rooted in authentic legacy repositioning. The irony didn't escape me. As he clicked to a new slide showing mock-ups of a campaign slogan built to serve, engineered for tomorrow. I leaned forward. "Excuse me," I said, calmly addressing the room. "Could you rewind one slide, please?" Ethan paused, his finger hovering above the clicker. "Is there a question, Mr. Delaney?" "There is," I said, reaching for my folder. That exact slogan and the core visuals on that slide were originally pitched by Kendra Liu, former lead strategist at Foresight Creative, during their 2021 proposal to the Atlantic Naval Initiative. A hush fell over the room. Ethan let out a short laugh. "That's quite the coincidence, but I can assure you our work is entirely original." I opened the folder and slid 2 documents across the table to Chuck and the board chair. These are internal time-stamped decks from Kendra's original concept, along with documentation of her complaint after her idea was rejected, only to appear in a presentation led by Ethan Walsh 6 weeks later. One of the directors adjusted his glasses, frowning as he flipped pages. Another pulled out their phone and began typing. Ethan stiffened. "That complaint was never substantiated," he said sharply. "It was dismissed." "No," I corrected, "it was settled quietly." "That's different." "And not the only one." I laid out 3 more statements, 2 anonymous ones signed, all recounting similar patterns: creative sabotage, idea theft, team manipulation, toxic leadership hidden behind buzzwords. "Gentlemen," I said to the board, "you're not hiring a strategist. You're onboarding a liability. You might not see it now, but give him access to your branding, your employees, and your resources, and you'll see it unravel." One of the senior directors cleared his throat. "Mr. Walsh, do you have a response?" Ethan's eyes darted from the documents to the faces around the room. The charm had drained from his voice. "This is obviously personal. Mr. Delaney is my father-in-law. He's trying to destroy my career out of spite." "Out of spite," I repeated. "You humiliated me in front of 200 people at your own wedding, and then bragged about manipulating me into paying for your honeymoon." I let it go. "But this," I tapped the folder, "this isn't about hurt feelings. It's about professional integrity. Yours, or lack thereof." The room stayed silent for a long moment. I didn't fill it. Ethan finally broke. "This is absurd. You have no legal grounds. No court would entertain." "We're not a court." Chuck said, his voice cool. "We're a defense contractor, and we value reliability over rhetoric." Another board member spoke up. "Mr. Walsh, we'll be pausing all discussions with your firm pending internal review. You're excused." Ethan opened his mouth to protest, but no words came. He gathered his laptop slowly, his hands shaking slightly. Before leaving, he turned to me and muttered, "You'll regret this." I stood, looked him in the eye, and said, "No, Ethan. One day you might regret that someone tried to warn you, and you laughed." Then he left, and the door closed behind him like a final verdict. There was no applause, no backslapping, just quiet nods and a few murmured thanks from the board members. Chuck leaned in and said quietly, "You just saved us a very expensive mistake." I nodded, but I didn't feel victorious. Because the damage had already been done, not to Mariner Systems, not to Ethan, but to Madison. And now, she was the one who would have to see the fallout. 3 days passed after the boardroom fallout. I didn't hear from Madison. Not a call. Not a text. Not even one of those emotionless typed dots on the phone screen that tell you someone's thinking of saying something. And truth be told, I was almost relieved, because I didn't know what I'd say if she did call. Would I apologize for what telling the truth? Would I comfort her? Even if part of her misery came from defending the man who used her. Instead, I did what I always do. When the weather turned still, I cleaned the gutters. I was halfway up the ladder on a Saturday morning, the sky cloudy and humid, with the promise of a late summer storm when I heard tires on gravel. I climbed down, slowly wiped my hands on an old navy towel, and turned to see a dark gray sedan stop at the front gate. She stepped out wearing jeans and a wrinkled blouse. No makeup, no heels. Her hair pulled into a messy knot like she hadn't slept in days. "Hi, Dad," she said. It took me a second to register the words. Not because I didn't hear them, but because she hadn't called me Dad since Eleanor's funeral. I nodded toward the porch. "You hungry?" She hesitated, then shook her head. "Just water, if that's okay." We sat in silence for a while, both of us on the porch, swing the wind off the bay, making the rope creak. Finally, she said it. "Ethan got fired." I didn't react. I just let it hang in the air. Mariner dropped the project. Then Axiom started an internal audit. More complaints surfaced. HR tried to contain it, but his name was already poisoned. By Tuesday, he was gone. Still, I said nothing. She looked at me. Her eyes were puffy but dry now. "You knew, didn't you, that it would happen?" I nodded once. I didn't make it happen. I just told the truth to the right people. She stared down at her hands. "He's furious. Said I betrayed him by not warning him about you. That I should have known better than to invite you into the same room." I waited. Then came the words that weighed more than any accusation. "He hit me, Dad." It was a short sentence. Simple, but it felt like someone drove a nail straight through my chest. My hands curled slowly on the armrest, where she touched her cheek just briefly. It wasn't hard, more of a slap. I told him I wanted time to think. He called me ungrateful, said I ruined his future by marrying into weakness. That word weakness landed like poison. I'd heard it before. In boot camp, in war rooms, in boardrooms full of cowards who'd hide behind bravado. It was always the word men used when they needed a reason to break something they couldn't control. Madison took a shaky breath. I packed a bag, stayed at a hotel for 2 nights. Thought about calling Mom, then remembered. Her voice cracked for the first time. I reached over, gently placed a hand on hers. She didn't pull away. And now I asked quietly. She looked at me. Not like a daughter looks at her father, but like a person who just realized the boat they built is leaking. And they need someone who knows how to patch it. "I need help," she said. "I need a lawyer, a place to stay, and honestly, a fresh start. I need help," she said again, this time more clearly. "Not just a place to sleep or legal advice. I need real support." I looked at her carefully. She wasn't trembling anymore. The rawness in her voice had steadied. There was something else rising to the surface now, something I recognized. Calculation. "Of course," I said gently. "You can stay here as long as you need." I'll call a lawyer. I trust someone who's dealt with high-profile separations before. You won't be alone. She nodded, then added, That's great, but I was thinking something more substantial. I waited. I can't live here forever, Dad. This house is beautiful, but it's isolated. Far from the city, far from opportunities. And let's be honest, not exactly a place where someone like me can rebuild a professional network. There it was. I didn't say anything. So I've been looking at apartments downtown, she continued almost breezily. Mid-range ones, nothing extravagant, but first month's rent deposit, basic furnishings. It adds up. Then there's the lawyer fees. And I'll need new clothes. Ethan never let me keep anything in my name. Even my work wardrobe is gone. I stared at her. How much are you asking for? She hesitated for just a second. About $25,000 to start. That should cover everything for the next few months while I get back on my feet. I leaned back, felt the old porch chair creak under my weight. I'd faced hurricanes quieter than this moment. Madison, I said as calmly as I could manage. I'll help you with a lawyer, and you can stay here. But I'm not writing a check for $25,000. Her mouth opened slightly. But I won't bankroll another version of the life you had with Ethan. That lifestyle, all flash, no foundation, is what helped bury you in the first place. She bristled. That's not fair. No, I said. What's not fair is asking me to fix everything with my wallet after years of silence, after letting that man mock and humiliate me. And what's worse is coming back here now, not just broken-hearted, but with a price tag attached to your pain. She crossed her arms. I thought you'd be glad I left him, that I saw through it. I am glad, I said. But leaving a man like that should have been the beginning of your awakening, not another business pivot. This isn't a campaign, Madison. This is your life. She stood up, jaw tight. So this is about pride, about proving a point. No, I said firmly. It's about finally doing things the right way. You want to rebuild, then stay, rest, heal. Let me help you with the things that matter. Not appearances, not networking, not image. She looked away, blinking fast, then softer. It's not just about money, Dad. I know, I said gently. But it's also not just about survival. It's about values. For a second, I saw the little girl she used to be, the one who skinned her knee trying to beat the boys at bike races, who used to curl up next to Eleanor on stormy nights. But the moment passed. I'll think about it, she said flatly. I nodded. Take your time. My offer still stands. This house, your house, is open. Just don't ask me to fund the kind of life I raised you to see through. She didn't reply, just stared out toward the bay where a pair of fishing boats drifted in silence. The wind had picked up. Rain was coming. But for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel like I was the one caught in the storm. She left the next morning. Didn't slam the door. Didn't cry. Didn't look back. Just wheeled her suitcase down the stone steps I once laid with my own hands, got into the car I helped her finance 10 years ago, and pulled out of the gravel driveway like she'd never been here at all, and I let her go. No ultimatums, no begging, no guilt-ridden monologues. Because if you've lived long enough, really lived, you learn that people don't change because you plead with them. They change when silence is louder than any sermon. I stood in the doorway long after the sound of her engine disappeared. Not moving, not blinking. Just breathing in the last of her perfume and wondering if it was grief or peace I felt in my chest. Maybe both. I spent that afternoon out in the shed, fixing the hinge on the bait locker and oiling the old mower. Nothing urgent. Just work. The kind of work Eleanor used to call stitching time back together. And she was right. Because somewhere between greasing a bolt and sanding an old oar, I remembered something she once told me after Madison's first big internship, when our daughter came home bragging about meeting a senator who couldn't remember her name twice in the same conversation. "She's aiming for the top," I said proudly back then. But Eleanor just smiled, quiet and sad. I hope she remembers to bring herself with her. I hadn't understood it fully then. I do now. I walked back inside as the sky turned that soft blue-gray right before dusk, the bay glowing like pewter. The house was quiet again. Not the silence of loneliness, but the kind that only comes after you've spoken every word you could, and none of them were enough. I passed her old bedroom on the way to mine, the door slightly ajar, bed still made, a hairbrush on the windowsill, a forgotten hoodie folded on the chair. I didn't touch any of it. Some part of me still believed she might come back. Not today, not next week, but someday when it's not about money or status or damage control. Someday when all she wants is to be my daughter again. That evening, I sat on the porch with a glass of rye and the last photograph we ever took as a family, me, Eleanor, and Madison, standing at the dock behind this house 4th of July, 20 years ago. Madison wore a crooked American flag headband. Eleanor had her arm around my waist. I remember thinking that moment would last forever. It didn't. Life doesn't keep people frozen the way photographs do. It drags them forward, sometimes into light, sometimes into shadows of their own making. And yet, I wouldn't trade my place in that photo for anything. Not for a different daughter. Not for a more obedient life. Not for the silence of never standing up for what I believe. People like Ethan Walsh, they thrive on performance. They measure life in likes, applause, press releases, and paid praise. Their legacies live on company websites and get wiped out by the next scandal. But the kind of legacy I've built, it's not printed. It's remembered. It lives in the young engineers I mentored, who now lead dry dock teams in Norfolk and San Diego. In the flag that still flies in the front yard, weathered but steady. In every nail, every beam, every porch rail in this old house that still holds its shape. Some people write their life stories in numbers and promotions. I've written mine in honor and consistency. That's not stubbornness. That's structure. The kind of structure that doesn't sway even when the wind howls hardest. I thought about Madison's last words at the door. You really believe you're doing the right thing. That your callousness is caring, your stubbornness is integrity. And maybe she's right. Maybe I am hard. Maybe I've always been. But it's that same hardness that kept me going through deployments, layoffs, loss, and now, distance. The same hardness that allowed me to stand in a room full of powerful men and speak the truth even when it meant losing the only family I had left. And I'll carry that with me into whatever time I've got left. Not as a shield, but as a compass. Tomorrow I'll get up at 6, make coffee, feed the gulls, maybe stop by the VFW hall and fix the wiring in the old veterans lounge. Maybe take a walk to the lighthouse where Eleanor and I used to sit in silence and watch the boats disappear beyond the line where sky meets sea. I'll keep showing up for the life I've built, the quiet, honest life. The one with no press release, but with peace. because that's the kind of story I believe in. And if Madison ever comes back not for money, not to negotiate terms, but to sit on this porch and say, I see it now. I understand. Then I'll be here. Not with a lecture, not with I told you so's, but with an open door and a chair waiting. Because forgiveness is part of the legacy too. If this story reminded you of someone you used to be, or someone you might still become, don't forget. Dignity isn't something we demand. It's something we live. Subscribe to Brian's Story for more true, powerful life stories of men who stood their ground when it mattered most. Your story doesn't end when they walk away. Sometimes, that's when it truly begins.